I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm your co-host, Dean Detloff.
And I'm your other co-host, Matt Bernico.
And listen, all I can do is think about Cuba anymore. I'm going to go to Cuba in just a few weeks, and I'm taking everybody else with me. It's the only thing I can talk about. I've become completely insufferable, a mystery to myself and others, an alien on a different planet. Every book I read is about Cuba. All the music I listen to is from Cuba. All the movies I watch are about Cuba. And that means this podcast is also about Cuba, whether you want it to be or not. It's Advent, and maybe you'd think we would do a podcast about Advent. Last year we did it, some great episodes on hope, peace, joy, and love. But this year we're talking about Cuba and Advent along the theme of all I want for Christmas is for Cuba to be free.
Really Cuba-pilled over here.
Really Cuba-pilled over here. That's right. Over the next few weeks, we're going to zero in on U.S. attitudes toward Cuba. We're going to talk about weird propaganda, why people of faith should be invested in creating solidarity with Cuba. And I think it's going to be fun. I feel great about it. I feel really good about it. And like I said, my promise is everyone else is going to feel good about it as well. To kick things off, we are going to talk about the propaganda campaign from the U.S. government that works to pit people of faith against the socialist revolution in Cuba, and also to discredit progressive religious people on the island. It is part of a very long history of the United States doing all kinds of spooky, nasty, naughty stuff with respect to Cuba. And we've talked about it a little bit in the past, so we'll cover some ground, I guess, that we've covered already. But this time we have a new resource, the first ever Magnificast zine called Christian Solidarity with Cuba. Matt, tell us about this great new resource, really offline, non-audible resource from the Magnificast.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. If you listened to our podcast before, or if you're just a person that exists in the world, you might know that the United States government is not a fan of Cuba. Or it would be more of a fan of Cuba if they could just squash this dang revolutionary movement that they've got going there. So you hear all over the place, Cuba is bad. It's on the state-sponsored terrorist list, which is bonkers. But what if there was a different story to religious people in Cuba that you didn't know about? Because the United States doesn't want you to know. And you can learn that whole story in our great Magnificast zine. It's 52 pages of great content about Christians interacting with the socialist revolution in Cuba, both historically and contemporaneously. And it's a great thing. It's too bad that Thanksgiving is over, because this is something you could slap down on that Thanksgiving table with your weird Uncle Ernie, and you could just really lay into him with this content. So anyways, it's a great thing that Dean is mostly responsible for, and I'm only marginally responsible for it. But I'll take a little bit of credit here. Anyways, if you want this content, and we know that you do, you can go to bit.ly/Cubazine, and you can get it. And that's Cubazine, all lowercase, no capitals, no masters. That's what we say in this podcast. It's a cool resource, and
anti-capitalism.
Yeah, exactly. Anti-capitalization. It's a cool resource. I think it's one of a kind. It's the only thing like it to ever exist, probably. And you need to get it. You need to read it. Or don't. I mean, I can't make you do it. I was a teacher for a long time, and I could never make anyone read anything, and I definitely can't make you read it, dear listener. But what I'm here to tell you is that it's a cool thing. So bit.ly/Cubazine. Some podcasts, they would be like, give us your email, give us your phone number, give us your data. But we don't care. Just go to the link, and it'll be fine. That's all we're asking for.
Give us your solidarity. You did miss the chance to introduce Uncle Ernie to this pamphlet over Thanksgiving, but it is designed to be printable, so you can go ahead and print it out and do it at your local library. It's a great stocking stuffer. Just put it in Uncle Ernie's stocking, and I'm sure you'll have one more person saying Cuba sí, blockade no by the end of Christmas.
That's what you need. Uncle Ernie he was missing this one weird podcast zine this whole time. That's what it was going to take to kind of get him to come around. And now he can. Great.
He really needed to know that Dorothy Day was down with Fidel Castro.
That's right. A socialist from the Catholic worker movement? Oh, incredible. Now I'm won over. Great. So we'll get to all of that in a bit. We'll talk more about the zine later on. But first. #but first. We're going to talk about the weird propaganda program that the United States has been pushing against Cuba for a very long time. And it kind of all resurfaced again recently when Baptist News Global, a reputable journalist outlet, published an article pushing, again, the entire narrative that Cuba is antagonistic toward religion, in an article titled "Cuban Government Clamps Down More on Religion." A great title. This comes from BaptistNews.com, a website I've never been to in my entire life before Dean told me about it. They republished a bunch of like information from a new-ish study from the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. So this is just sort of like a condensed like reactionary take on even more reactionary document. There's so many layers here, folks, I guess what I'm trying to say. So there's the Baptist News website. They're pulling information from USAID, which is already very suspicious, which is also pulling information from the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, which is even more suspicious. So we're going to talk a lot about the this like document. It's called Constitutional Reform and Religious Freedom in Cuba. And again, it's by the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. And I feel like I've already kind of muddled things up by naming 3 things at once, and that's okay. Anyways, let me just give you a quick rundown of what this thing is, and then we'll talk about all the very weird reasons why we should maybe disregard it or be very critical of it at least. So this is a document that's put together that's like, you know, the point is to measure the levels of religious freedom people have in Cuba. And that's interesting. The findings are, as you might guess, negative overall. This document from the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom wants you to believe that the situation on religious liberty in Cuba is very bad. But you know, and maybe there's some truth to it, and there's some caveats we can make to it for sure. But I think what's really important is that this is a document that is kind of doing a very suspicious study of religious people in Cuba. It's really important to kind of put this up here at the front of the conversation before we get into any of the juicy bits. The methodology is bad. So the structure,
it's extremely funny.
It's extremely funny, and funny is another way of putting it. It's bad and funny at the same time. So the structure of this whole thing rests on an e-survey. That was informed. Okay, so it's an e-survey. They sent it out to religious people in Cuba, which is already kind of like a funny idea. Hi, I'm from the United States government, and I would like you to answer some questions about your religious faith. Is that okay? you might ask some Cubans. A complicated thing to ask somebody, regardless, but even more so in Cuba. Okay, so it's an e-survey that was sent out to people who are religious in Cuba. To like religious leaders and lay people, kind of a mix of people. The methodology section suggests the questions that they asked were drummed up based on a focus group between Cuban faith leaders and also the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. So kind of like this like small meeting between a United States governmental organizational kind of body and also Cuban faith leaders. So you can imagine how that might shape the conversation. They came up with 106 questions to ask people, and then the e-survey went out to a bunch of people, and the results are staggeringly low. So 56 people completed the e-survey. That's 56 people in total. So this is a 30-page document about how the religious freedom in Cuba is very bad, but it's 56 people only kind of weighing in. And you might imagine, the people who are answering the survey are probably not people who are already, very positive about their sort of religious movements space in Cuba to begin with. So very complicated. Dean, what am I missing from the methodology section? I feel like there's more, but I can't remember at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is very funny, as we've been saying. It's a very small sample size, a very kind of stacked deck, kind of getting the folks that you want, I guess. Also, the questions, they don't list them all in this report. I was trying to find them because they do say somewhere in a footnote that you can find them on the website. They're not obvious, I guess. I'll say that. But the responses were also pretty simple. They're like yes-no responses, and then there's some more qualitative data as well. The methodology also relies on kind of like particular ways of framing questions around religious freedom. So it has a lot to do with the legal definitions of freedom of religion and belief, which are pretty particular. We'll get more into that in a minute, I'm sure. And also, I think probably the most important thing is that the survey is really centered around what they call independent churches or independent Christians. And by independent, they mean a church or a faith organization that is explicitly not in any way either registered with the government or related to what's called the Office of Religious Affairs, the ORA. And what that means is there's a whole swath of Christians who are not included. So they're giving you a lot of ways of kind of paring down the sample size here, right? It's a small number of people. It is born out of a focus group with some pretty specific actors. And also, lastly, it only is concerned with the experience of people who are kind of already setting themselves up to be in opposition to the Cuban project in one way or another.
Yeah, that's right. This whole study is an interesting experiment in understanding what 56 specific people think about religion in Cuba. And that's it. Nothing more and nothing less. It is very funny, though, that it's set up with such a small sample size because there'll be statistics where it'll say 98% of respondents said this. And what you have to recognize is that 98% of respondents is 54 people or something crazy. It's it's just frustratingly... It's very frustrating about the way that it's framed because it's clearly skewed for a particular political viewpoint, and it shows painfully so.
It also, I should say too, the executive summary starts out by saying that the report sets out to improve understanding of Cuba's constitutional and legal protections for freedom of religion or belief, both in law and practice. And I think that is a pretty hilarious goal, given these kind of qualifications that we've made, right? So I just sort of want to underline that the report, it will go out of its way to say, look, these are these respondents saying this and so on, but it is trying intentionally to draw very, very general points. And just to add on to this too, this body that is responsible for it, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, they put out all kinds of policy documents. In fact, they put out a policy report that was right on the heels of this report, where they make all kinds of recommendations to the U.S. government, and they extrapolate from their data and research and so on. And I was looking at that document before this episode, and as you could guess, they have some pretty strong recommendations involving even more sanctions on Cuba. That's how you might deal with religious freedom problems in Cuba for USAID these days, or for whatever this weird commission might be. So all that to say, a really limited sample size, drawing some pretty general conclusions that do actually filter themselves into policy documents that real life, actual representatives and presidents and so on read in order to be informed about Cuba.
Yep. Read uncritically, I think. So there's a lot in this 30-page document, but the three things that we're going to focus on are the constitutional protections for people of faith or religious belief, We're going to talk about the so-called, especially in this document, the fake people of faith that are around every corner in Cuba. They're just waiting there for you. And then we're also going to talk about the atheist ideology present in school systems, which is very funny. And then we'll also talk a little bit about some other kind of related conversation around this with regards to Colin Powell. And then maybe at the very end, we'll probably, all too rushed, talk more about this zine that we made. So the first part that we're going to talk about here are about the constitutional protections for religious communities and people of faith and people of conscience in Cuba. Okay, so there are two documents here that you kind of need to be familiar with, and well, not even that familiar with it, but there are two documents in specific that that this study kind of looks at. So there's a 1976 Constitution, and then there's also a 2019 Constitution that was amended by the people of Cuba. You might remember that story from our podcast. We've told it several times, I'm sure. This is maybe just kind of a nice summary of like what's happening here from this Baptist News article that's kind of extrapolating some of the details. So it says this: adopted in April 2019, Cuba's current constitution provides fewer protections for religious freedom or belief than in previous 1976 document did. The panelist and study co-author Javier Laranado explained that its potential ability to protect religion from arbitrary and unlimited action by the Communist Party has disappeared in the new constitution. Okay, so this could be concerning if you're a religious person in Cuba. You want to know about religious freedom there. In the 1976 document, there were certain protections. In the 2019 document, those protections have vanished. Is kind of like the picture that they paint here. In the full study, they're a little bit more careful with their language around this, but just the same, I mean, that's kind of like what's at the root of it. I decided I was going to look this up specifically, and I think that they're overstating the problem, but that's just me. There are exactly 2 articles about the religious liberty of Cubans in both the 1976 Constitution and the 2019 Constitution, and they are extremely similar, not all that different. The rub here is that the language is like slightly different in the new Constitution in 2019, which in theory would limit the Cuban government's ability to protect religious expression. This is that's what would happen, perhaps. This next quote is from the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. It says that the new constitution did remove the ability for religious institutions to be regulated by law by removing the previous language, and then in quotes, the law regulates the relations of the state with religious institutions. So the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom argues that Cuba's 2019 constitution opens up a door for more state repression of religious communities because they can't be like protected, right? Like there's not religious liberty laws giving special protections. But also the Constitution itself, this is even where it becomes more complicated. The United States Commission on International Religious Freedom says that the Constitution itself in Cuba is not a supreme law because the government has continued to legislate more laws after the fact, which to me seems like a very bizarre claim to get like really caught up in like the importance of the Constitution, but then say, well, the Constitution isn't actually valid because it's not a supreme law in the sense that the United States Constitution is a supreme law, which it's not really anyways. I mean, it just seems like a wild argument to make. There's a lot of things happening here. But like, I don't know, it seems like a weird thing to be mad that the Constitution, people continue to make laws after the Constitution has been amended. Like that's the way constitutions work. I don't know exactly like why that's something that's a problem. But that's one part of the problem here, right? There's like, they've changed a bit of the language, and that has opened up the door for the Cuban government to like, perhaps in theory, I don't know, crack down on certain religious organizations. And yeah, I don't know, Dean, what do you think? I've been talking a lot. What do you have to say about this?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. The distance between the concern here and what's really going on is I don't know, hard to track, I guess. What I think is so weird about it too, though, in addition to all that stuff, like, yeah, laws keep getting made and all that is true. They also make a claim in the report that the Constitution is really kind of a big PR stunt.
Yeah.
That it exists to kind of make Cuba look more progressive to an international audience, to the UN specifically, they say. And it's really weird because on the one hand, they want to say the Constitution, like Cuba is not a constitutional country. that the Constitution that exists is, for public relations purposes. And that's so bizarre for two reasons. The first is, they kind of note that the 76 Constitution or 79 Constitution, whatever it was, 76, they say that one had a stronger protection, and it's sort of a bad thing that now the protections are weak. But that would be kind of bizarre because apparently the Constitution isn't effective in the first place, right? So they're kind of making two arguments here. Yeah. The second is that if it wasn't a constitutional country and if the Constitution was just a kind of big show, that would be pretty wild because the process by which Cuba amended its constitution was extremely participatory, involved thousands of meetings and consultations, and in fact involved Christians being so vocal that, reactionary Christians that is, that eventually the Cuban government walked back an amendment to the Constitution that had to do with redefining the family, which just came back this past summer and succeeded. So, if it was just for show, why would they mobilize the entire country to do this? And why would conservative Christians, as people of faith, feel so committed to coming out and doing something about it? So it's really weird. The report really asks you, I think, time and again to sort of just take their word for something.
Yeah, there's one example I found in the document. I kind of had to do some digging. It's kind of in the depths. Let me tell you about it. The claim was that, the Constitution doesn't matter because the party will just make up whatever laws they, need or see fit, which again is completely not like the United States. That's not how it happens here. There are no more laws. There's only the Constitution. Okay. Such a silly thing. Anyways, so specifically though, in the document though, they cite some legislation, legal norms and laws that repress certain kinds of telecommunications. Like that's what all of their examples kind of revolve around. Which I guess is problematic, but understandable given the history of U.S. interference and other things. I don't know, whatever. I mean, I'm not the Cuban government, but it's their laws. So anyways, there's only one, though, that I found that specifically deals with religious communities. I mean, most of them are broadly about telecommunications and the abuse of telecommunications in Cuba. So I don't know. But one of them specifically mentions religious people and religious belief in specific. So I thought that I'd pull that one out. So it says this. In February 2022, the government published a draft for a new penal code which contains a clause stating that whoever abusing the freedom of worship guaranteed by the Constitution puts religious belief in opposition to education or the responsibility to work, the defense of the homeland with weapons, the reverence of its symbols, or any other established by the Constitution will be punished with deprivation of liberty for 6 months to 1 year or a 3,000 peso fine, or both. Religious leaders have raised their concerns about the clause and the implications of the government punishing religious community when at odds with state policy. So that's the one that they're worried about. And I don't know. Yeah, that seems, I don't know. It just seems like, people being frustrated that a law exists. I don't know. I'm sorry that a law exists. They exist like this in the United States too. The government has, I every time the persecution of religious people comes up about other countries, I always get so mad because of the stories about water protectors or the plowshares movement or something. Just so frustrated that people are willing to go to these lengths to kind of mine the depths of laws in other countries and ignore them so furiously in the United States.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, that's the thing, too. I think it's fair to be kind of nervous in a very general way about, not allowing religion to be in contrast to the state. We'll talk more about that later, because I think that's also a nuanced conversation and one that progressive churches are having in a different kind of way. But it's like you said, when we talk about water protectors or the Kings Bay Plowshare 7, if you read... so this is a group of mostly Catholic activists who broke into a nuclear facility and, did some light vandalism and were sent to prison. What's wild about it is if you read all their statements, every one of their statements is I did this because I'm a person of faith, right? And the state, understandably actually incarcerates them, even though I don't like prisons and think that it's bad. they're being incarcerated in particular because at the end of the day, their religious belief is a threat to all these things, the defense of the homeland with its weapons,
Yeah.
the reverence of its symbols and so on. But the United States doesn't have a law about religion in particular. They get sentenced for something else. And it's not to excuse that or to say just because the U.S. does it, therefore Cuba should be able to do it or something like that. But I guess it's just to say the way that U.S. people talk about other people's laws is always bizarre and kind of a bit of doublespeak. And also to I guess, point out, what Cuba is talking about here is less the matter of religion in particular and more the kind of issues related to social cohesion and the defense of Cuba as a, pretty lonely socialist outpost in the middle of the ocean, not far from the United States. So I think it's important to contextualize that they're not saying that, like, you can't be religious. And as we'll kind of talk about later, they're also not saying you can't have a dissenting opinion within Cuba. But the way in which that is lodged or kind of contextualized makes all the difference.
Yeah, right. I mean, the rub here is using your particular, like, the legally protected freedom of being a religious person to somehow, like, harm other people in a telecommunications sort of sense, right? It's a different sort of thing what they're talking about.
Yeah, and as you said, given to the long history of Cuba having to deal with actual attacks via telecommunications and otherwise, it makes sense.
The United States did reinvent Twitter just for Cuba, which, I mean,
not very long ago.
Not very long ago. And, like, given the situation, could they just reinvent Twitter for the United States?
We need Zanzeo for the U.S.
That's right. All right, so there's that piece there. Lots of sort of, like, weird back and forth about the Constitution, about what it means, about how it's not enough protection, it's too much protection, the Constitution's fake, all kinds of stuff. Great. Good. Okay, so there's another piece of the thing here too that is, I think, extremely frustrating to me, and I am mad about it. So again and again in this document, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, that document, they keep kind of bringing up time and time again that there are official religious institutions in Cuba, right? So, like, how can you say that there are these, like, how can you say that religion is so persecuted in Cuba when they exist there? And they came up with an extremely ham-fisted way of getting around this, and I think it's extremely stupid. So basically what they do is they just say they're fake, and that's kind of the extent of it. So here's an excerpt. The facade of religious communities is presented to Cubans and international audiences as evidence of religious representatives in harmony with the government. That's from the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. And then they go on to say, many faith leaders believe these groups are run by state officials posing as faith leaders. Truly independent umbrella faith organizations are actively repressed. So that's
the perfect crime.
Yeah, that's like one piece there. But then elsewhere in this document, it gets even, like, the language becomes even more pointed, and it's really frustrating. All right. Elsewhere, they say, state-created and controlled proxy organizations supplant faith leadership and discourage interfaith unity. Most faith leaders surveyed, again, most faith leaders is 56 people surveyed, agree that these proxy organizations pretend to be religious to dominate the representative space of real religious organizations. This facade is presented to Cubans and international audiences as evidence of religious representatives in harmony with the government. These organizations include the Cuban Council of Churches, the Yoruba Cultural Association, the Islamic League of Cuba, and Pastors for Peace, of whom we've had a representative from on our show. Many faith leaders believe these groups are run by state officials posing as faith leaders. Truly independent umbrella faith organizations are actively repressed. That's the whole quote there. This is extremely frustrating because it's just like, oh, sorry, is there a counterexample to any of this? Oh, there is. They're fake. They're just fake Christians. They're fake Christians. They're fake Muslims. They're fake Yoruba. I don't understand. Like, it's so ham-fisted because, like, they're all fake is what they say, which is just, blatantly not true, right? Like, they can't all be fake. And as an evangelical in my heart, for better and for worse, how can you know if they're fake Christians is like maybe the the really terrifying like existential part of this. Like how could the United States possibly know if you're a fake Christian? And if they know, could you please tell me specifically, because I need that kind of affirmation, I think. No, just kidding. The whole thing is so frustrating and so paternalistic in its ability to be able to name the fake and the true, right? Based on 56 people in Cuba who are, obviously the deck is stacked. Just so infuriating just to write off a bunch of people as being fake people of faith. Just complete bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, it's also so funny, like the kind of conspiracy theory here, right? That state officials are posing as faith leaders, that somehow the Communist Party of Cuba has like created these fake churches in order to, get the true believers in the door and cozy with the government. It's such a cynical way of thinking about like average Christian people in Cuba. For example, like the Cuban Council of Churches existed before the revolution, and they made a choice that they would not be a counter-revolutionary force during the revolution, and that also took time. There's a lot of history about it. Jim Hodgson on our show has talked to us a little bit about it in the past. You can read about a guy named Sergio Arce, a really fascinating pastor who was involved in this kind of history. But they had to work to create a theology that they felt was authentic to them and also gave them a kind of way in to the revolution on their own terms, right? Or the same with Pastors for Peace, which is the fruit of this connection of mostly Black and racialized pastors in Harlem and New York, making these real connections with other Christians in Cuba, especially Raul Suarez, the guy who, the Baptist pastor in Cuba who founded the MLK Center, which today is still run by ministers and is a massive kind of church space and community organizing space, right? Like when you really get into the stories of these kinds of institutions, these organizations, you find out that there's a pretty incredible history of solidarity, of Christians really reflecting carefully and intentionally. And to sort of just take the word for like a handful of 56 pastors who are, I guess, crabby at the government, to say that, oh, they're probably fake, they're government run, they're secret state spies in here trying to, I don't know, pose as Christians. Like, it's a really cruel thing, I think. Like it dismisses the kind of work that has been done actively by Christians on that island to find their own way in an extremely complicated process. And I think that's too bad. Like, at the very, very least, you would hope that someone at USAID would, like, have the good sense to kind of treat these people as, like, real human beings and not just, I don't know, caricatures, but apparently not.
The other thing I was thinking, too, and we'll talk about maybe this a bit when we get to Colin Powell, that I think that they're fake Christians is actually a really important, or fake Muslims or fake Yoruba, all of it. They're fake religious people is an important inoculation, though, when you're handing this type of study off to people who are, like, in America, people of faith. Because if they're fake, it's like, it plays into the already existing stereotype that, like, if you are a Christian, what you are is regressive, at least, if not right out reactionary. And it kind of helps them, I think, make sense of Christianity in a particular frame, the United States frame of Christians being conservative or something and not progressive. So I don't know. It does some inoculation work to kind of like, I'm sure like all of the stupid U.S. Congress people who are reading this kind of document are like, oh, great, they're fake. I almost had to worry about them for a minute because I might go to the same church as them in some sense, but nope, they're fake. So it's okay. I can just kind of like write them off.
Yeah. It's also so weird because these institutions have partners and connections with other Christian institutions outside of Cuba. Right. For example, like I mentioned, Jim Hodgson is friends with all these folks. The World Council of Churches, the big global body, is close to the Cuban Council of Churches, which is a member of the WCC. I can't imagine that the United States is saying that, the World Council of Churches members in the U.S. are fake Christians, which would be pretty much most of the mainline Christian denominations, the kinds of denominations from which presidents usually come and so on, it's strange because it discounts even the work of Christians in the U.S. or Canada or elsewhere to get to know these kinds of folks. So it's an insult to Cubans. It's also completely dismissing actual Christians that the authors of this report probably are not, even aware that they're dismissing, I guess, in the end.
Yeah, I mean, it's not altogether dissimilar either from like the ways that the institutional church in like China gets written off either, right? Like the house churches or the underground church is the real deal, whereas the state sponsored churches are, they're fake. They're just there for show or whatever. Even though they are more like theologically orthodox probably than the underground church or whatever. But yeah, just like a similar vibe.
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, let's go to the last piece of this report and then talk about Colin Powell, which is the concern about atheist ideology. There is a big thing in this report about atheism in Cuban schools. And I don't know, probably there is an atheist school curriculum in Cuban schools. I think Margaret Randall told us a little bit about that even when we had her on the show. She talked about raising kids in Cuba and what that was like for her. And, like, I wouldn't have any doubts that it's a pretty standard materialist curriculum down there in Cuba. But it is really fascinating the way that they talk about it. The sort of impression you get from the report is that you really can't be a Christian in school, just like
the United States.
The Republicans are nervous about. Yeah, exactly. Just like the United States.
You got to meet everyone at the poll and you pray before school.
That's right. You get your bracelet. They all go to the Cuban flagpole and they pray for their country. And, I'm sure probably being like a Christian growing up in school, in some schools is probably alienating. Like, I have no doubt that's probably rough if you're like a kid who's really passionate about your faith, I guess. Like, maybe it's a weird situation. Who knows? I didn't grow up in Cuba. I have absolutely no idea. I'm inventing a situation in my mind. But it's strange, too, because you get this kind of... I guess, unsaid ideal about what education should be, that there should be a strong religious education component in school or something, or that, Cuba says that it's secular, but in fact it's atheist in this kind of big way. And you really can't have a religious opinion outside the school curriculum. And I think that is, first of all, bizarre and clearly not true, given that there are whole seminaries in Cuba and people go to them and apparently are, they survive their atheist education enough to still want to be pastors. But it's also bizarre, too, because the flip side, again, is always in the United States, the school program that you have, even in public school, at least in my experience, is basically by default Christian, right? As far as I know, there's no U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom writing concerning reports about, like, Muslims feeling alienated in Christian public schools in the Midwest, right? But you could write something functionally similar. And I always find that really bizarre, especially when they talk about atheism in Cuba, that it is not a profoundly religious country historically. It's unique among Latin America in that way. And it's just a strange thing to be really worked up about atheist education, I think.
Yeah, it is so funny to think about this, though, from the context of the United States. I was telling Dean before we started recording the podcast that one time in high school, I was taking like a home ec class, and the teacher was teaching us how to like make like a pie crust or something, and she put salt in it, and she said, just like how Christians are the salt and light of the world. And like kind of shoehorning this like awful like Christian talking point into the home ec class in a completely like cringy way. I don't know, just extremely funny to be like, yeah, but can you believe that the United States has this deeply held Christian educational system? Oh, it's so awful. I don't know. It's just frustrating because lots of unstated assumptions, lots of weird lots of weird alternate parallels, I guess. I don't know. Very, very complicated. I also remember, too, when I was in high school, being, like, really urged by a youth pastor to, like, have sort of, like, a group of Christians pray before school because, like, we couldn't pray during class or something. Like, that was a really important piece of it. And, like, we would meet and pray before school on, like, Wednesdays in some teacher's room. And it was, like, I don't know, it felt very countercultural, but it also, wasn't. It wasn't at all. I don't know. Very weird ways that people conceptualize the connection between religion and education in like secular spaces. And I got to tell you, this report did not do a great job of doing that.
That's right. There's also no similar report coming out about like education in Quebec or something. So I don't know.
Yeah,
we'll see about that
one. Great point.
So this report, it's as we said earlier, it's one more step in the very, very long march of the United States trying to disparage the Cuban project and discredit it and so on. And just to be clear, like, I'm sure that there are a lot of Christians who do have a hard time in Cuba, and I wouldn't want to dismiss that. I don't live there, and that is what it is. We'll talk more, though, about some other Christians that we know about in a minute. But it's important to contextualize these kinds of things in that long project of trying to destabilize Cuba. And you might think that, they had the big situation. They had Operation Mongoose. There was the Cuban Missile Crisis, the special period, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, the U.S. has been up to some bad stuff, but not recently, of course, you might think.
I mean, pretty recently, though, if you think about it.
Yeah, you would be wrong. It has not stopped, but it has sort of changed certain maybe flavors or something like that. And when it comes to religion, I think that's always an interesting piece in this whole thing. Religion has always been a kind of ideological part of the war on Cuba, the psychological kind of war against Cuba. Stories about, the severe repression of religion, all that kind of stuff has been around since the beginning of the revolution. But it came out in a more direct way in 2004 in a really wild document written by Colin Powell called it was a report for the Commission for Assistance to a Free Cuba. And it was a commission set up by George W. Bush in 2003. And according to the Cuba Archive at the American University in Washington, where this document is posted, it says the commission has two main goals: to aid the Cuban people to end the Castro regime and to plan for ways in which the U.S. government can deliver assistance to the Cuban people during the period of transition to democracy. Now, the particular document here is very long. It's like 400 some pages, but religion plays actually a pretty prominent role. And some liberation theologians have also pointed it out over time. It's it's a thing, I guess, in Latin America. So in it, here's a couple places where Colin Powell pulls out religion. So he's imagining that they've done it. They succeeded. They ended the Castro regime, and democracy is right around the corner. Colin Powell says, religious organizations can play an indispensable role in the transition to a free Cuba. This is not simply because religion and religious institutions have been suppressed under the communists, or because external religious bodies have roots in Cuba and seek to help. Rather, the special importance of religious institutions in the transition is due to the fact that they are one of the few intact non-governmental organizations on the island that have the trust of the people and the means to organize through an existing social network of communications and distribution channels at all levels of society, right? So he's trying to think about, ironically, kind of collective experiences outside the state. He then says, within most communities, churches and faith-based organizations are a major part of the support system. The Cuban people during a transition likely will want to maintain and strengthen those systems. Faith-based organizations can provide emotional support, a sense of trust and continuity. They can also be used to educate and to communicate information to individuals and communities on the subject areas covered in this chapter. Those subject areas are basically a number of kind of regime change ideas in particular that the churches would help disseminate new information about what it is to become a capitalist country, in essence. So an extremely weird
I love
thing.
when my government's LARPing. I think that's great.
Yeah, exactly. This is Colin Powell's wild fantasy of ending communism in Cuba.
It's so, I mean, whatever. I guess like it is his wild fantasy of ending the Castro regime in Cuba. But I guess it does make some sense. I guess that like that's where you build support, right? Somewhere outside the state, which I guess is the church. So I don't know. But overall, though, I think it just lends more like credence to the idea of how cynical I think people in the United States are, especially kind of like in terms of like foreign relations are around churches. I mean, it's pretty brazen here, right? It's like it's not really about religion at all. It's just like that's like the hinge that maybe you can move sort of like a different movement on. I don't know. It seems hard to look at that and then look at the the document that we talked about earlier and not see them as like, you know, the one carrying out the other, for sure. It's all so cynical. It does not treat people as like real religious people of faith, doesn't treat people as anything more than sort of like one-dimensional people on a chessboard of political action or something. Just all very gross and frustrating.
Yeah, well, the U.S. also has this history of supporting particular kinds of evangelicalism in Latin America, and it's no secret. I mean, they support evangelicals as a counter to liberation theology, in particular in that region. And it often puts their foreign policy at odds. In fact, for instance, one of the organizations mentioned in Colin Powell's document is Echo Cuba, an organization run by evangelicals, this guy named Teo Babin in particular. And they did not like the Cuban change to the family code and advocated pretty strongly in a homophobic way against it. The irony is that USAID is funding Echo Cuba, and they also often regularly complain about LGBT rights around the world. I mean, rightly, they should do that, I guess, so we should all do that. But they're actively funding homophobia in Cuba as a strategy to change the government, right? So it's important, too, to recognize, like, the kinds of Christians that this sort of report is really concerned about are really the Christians who are the conservative element in Cuban society. The Christians who are, actually trying to deepen the revolution, to make a change, to advocate for progressive change, and to bring that up in the context of the revolution, as opposed to from outside the revolution. Those are the fake Christians, right? They don't play a role. The religions or the religious organizations, I guess, that can help transition to a free Cuba, at the end of the day, those ones that the government wants are the ones that it funds, or the ones that it polls and surveys to make reports. And, they are generally the ones that I don't really like in the United States either. It's a sort of weird kind of network of very bizarre Christianity.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, at a certain extent, too, you can see how it's not really about religion at all. It's kind of about the, people who will put up barriers or will not put up barriers to, what the U.S. wants. In this case, it's, regime change in Cuba or something. So there he is. I don't know. Lots of just like cynicism and incredibly annoying stuff. But this is the kind of document that your Congress people are probably reading. So it's bad. It's bad. And we ought to set the story straight, at least as much as we can, right? I mean, we're just a podcast with only a few thousand listeners, and I'm thankful for that. But I guess it's got to get the word out, I guess, about the counter narratives about different types of Christianity that do exist, regardless if they pose some kind of problem to the United States interests abroad. So we decided that we would make this zine that tells like another story about Christianity in Cuba, an alternative narrative, the story that the government does not want you to know. That seems like it's too important, but it is, I think, true to a certain extent. So in the zine, we've got all kinds of different accounts of like people of faith who are, interested in the revolution one way or another, people who are both from, Latin America or from the United States, or people who are in Cuba specifically. And I think it's a pretty cool thing. I don't know, Dean, you're the one I think that put the most work into it. So do you want to talk about the zine more explicitly?
Yeah, well, I think you got it right. The goal is to really show that there's a bigger conversation about Christianity and Cuba and Christianity in Cuba. And basically the setup of the zine is that it takes a variety of different characters or figures or movements and just gives you a bit of a snapshot of what their interest in Cuba is or what their thoughts on Cuba might be. And the majority of things that, or kind of people that we quote, are actually people outside of Cuba taking a trip to see it themselves. And I think they provide good examples of what it means to be a Christian outside of Cuba, reflecting on Cuba, which is the position that we find ourselves in. So that's a voice that comes through strongly through a number of folks. For instance, Dorothy Day's in there, who's interesting because she is not a Marxist-Leninist and has a pretty particular way of thinking about politics and her Catholic faith. So it's great to get her kind of impressions on Cuba. You get some liberation theologians in there, Fray Beto, Ernesto Cardenal, Leonardo Boff, and so on. But there's also a bit of a constitution from the student Christian movement of Cuba that gives a snapshot of what it's like for a student Christian movement, a movement of young people, to see themselves as part of the socialist transformation in Cuba. So there's some really interesting rhetoric that shows, a different way of thinking about being a Christian in Cuba. There's also a great report in here by Jim Hodgson that he updated for us from something that he wrote almost 10 years ago about the Martin Luther King Memorial Center. So it gives a bit of a kind of, picture of what's going on there, what the background is for that kind of space and why it exists. And that's kind of trying to just create a bit of a space to say, it's not just independent Christians being repressed. There is an active and creative element among Christians in Cuba that are trying to think through how to participate in the revolution. And I think the most important thing, I hope that there's lots of interesting pieces and whatever. You get a cool quote that you can show Uncle Ernie or whatever at Christmas time. But the most important part is actually toward the end. We tried to provide some other resources, places where you can connect with people. But there's also a call to action about dropping the blockade against Cuba. And we're going to talk more about that, I think, in the coming weeks. It's hard to talk about Cuba without talking about the blockade. But I think if folks get anything out of this, at the end of the day, I think it's that Christians in the global north have a real responsibility to be advocating in any way that we can for the dissolution of the blockade against Cuba. If you need more background on it, Jim has talked about it a bunch of times on past episodes. We're going to talk about it again soon. But the blockade effectively is keeping Cuba from developing in the way that it wants to. It is illegal. It's not right. It's very bad. It is violent. It costs lots of money. It costs people their health and so on. And Christians should say that's not good. So hopefully this pamphlet gives you maybe a little bit more of a background on how to enter into thinking about Cuba. I guess that's the main purpose. And then at the end, it has this good call to action. So whether it's writing a representative or maybe if you're not in the U.S., finding some way of getting involved in a Cuba Solidarity organization or whatever, just finding some way to kind of raise that voice against a blockade like that.
That's right, folks. All of it is in there and more. It's at least that much is definitely in there, though. And you can get this great zine if you go to bit.ly/CubaZine, and you can just download it right there. You don't have to give us any information. We don't care who you are. But all we want you to do is to help us end this awful blockade. And by Christmas, we're going to get it. Probably not. But we won't stop trying, that's for sure.
By next Christmas, we'll get it.
By next Christmas, certainly we will have gotten it.
Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can get that great zine at bit.ly/CubaZine, CubaZine. You can support us on Patreon if you want at patreon.com/themagnificast. If you support us at $2 or more, you can join a Discord server that we have. Lots of great conversations there. I imagine lots of good Cuba conversations coming up. And it's a good community of folks. Great people to be sharing recipes with and talking about, weird church gossip and whatever else. Our music is by Amoria Armstrong. Our outro is by The Illogical Spoon. We'll see you next week.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still early. At least I would have